Hey, I was trying to start this live outside because the weather's good, but my phone said not to. So I'm walking back to my office. So I'm going to wait for some people to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll talk about the newsletter. Oh, here's Jackie. I'm going to get some fresh air, though. So I'm probably going to sit out on my roof. See how this goes. Awesome. Waving at another person. And yeah, so in a couple minutes we'll get it started, and I'll read a little bit from the newsletter, and we'll talk about Geist, which is the word of this week. The light in here is just, I don't know what to do about that. So, and if anybody has any questions or whatnot, feel free to add them to the question section, and I'll go ahead and start answering your questions. But also, when I go out on my roof, I put my shoes on, so I feel like I'm like Mr. Rogers right now, putting on like an outfit to go outside. Well, let's do this. So anyways, let's just start with the word. So, the word of the week is Geist. And Geist is... Oh, man. I can see my... That's weird. I'm like 2 feet from my neighbor. Oh, hey, Cam. Alright, so the word of the week this week is Geist. And it's a really, really important word. It's a German word, and casually, you just it means ghost. People say it, if you speak in German, like a ghost is Geist. But it grows from there. It means your spirit and your soul, which in many ways is quite similar to in English, where, you have a spirit, you have a soul, and that's something that you have when you're alive, but then when you die, you become a spirit, you become a soul. And so in this way, the words are fairly interchangeable, because you have a Geist and means spelt the same thing. But where it gets really interesting is that your Geist is also your mind and your intelligence in German. And I think this changes it quite a bit from English and makes it really hard to translate, because I don't think we think of our mind or our intelligence or our wit or our personality as our soul. That's just, we don't articulate that clearly in English. It's just like who you are as a person or something like that, but it doesn't have a spiritual connection to it, which linguistically it does in German. And so when we think about what matters to us, the things that are important to us, if your personality, just like that inexplicable part of you that is just makes you who you are, if you articulate that with a spiritness attached to it, like a Geist, I think it radically changes how you see yourself and how you see your environment. But one thing that's also really fascinating about Geist is that it's also not purely on the individual. And this is shown with the word Zeitgeist. So a Zeitgeist, that means spirit of the time. Zeit means time. And so a Zeitgeist is clearly a collective thing. There's not, we don't really talk about like an individual Zeitgeist. And so your Geist, in this collective sense, is more like the spirit or the soul of a people, which is also the culture of those people. And so this word takes on so many dimensions, where like the intelligence of a people, the art of a people, the intelligentsia, the people that form that intellectual framework of a people, that's part of the Geist or the culture. It's like the spiritual culture of a people is also encompassed with this word Geist. And when you take the layers of this word and you have the individual part that's, ghost, that applies clearly when you're no longer living, but then you have that applies to you when you are living, and also means your your spirit, or so. Man, more people are coming, this is great. Where your spirit or your soul also is like the essence of who you are as a person, like your innate attributes that make you distinct and unique. Like that is something that needs to be nourished just like your soul does. And that's really, really significant. And then you take that next level of the word, where this concept of this unique soul, personality, intelligence, mind, wit that you live with is not just like an individual thing, but it's a collective thing. It's a collective concept that can be used to define a whole swath of people. Now we're having something quite profound. And so for the Sustainable Culture Lab, Geist is a really important word, because when we're talking about ethnocide, we're talking about the destruction of a culture while keeping... So, okay, my connection's back. So, like, with Sustainable Culture Lab, we're talking about the destruction of culture while sustaining the people. And sometimes, and I didn't really think of this at first, but... Alright, so what's happened? So, like, at SCL, when we talk about Geist, when we talk about ethnocide, we're talking about the destruction of culture while keeping the people. And sometimes that destruction of the culture can be, like... So yeah, apparently my connection was bad when I was outside, so now I'm inside, and so we'll see what happens, but it should be fine. But the destruction, ethnocide, the destruction of culture, clearly that encompasses like the destruction of cultural artifacts. It can be, and it can be clothing, it can be hairstyles, it can be physical things that is being destroyed. But at the same time, the destruction of culture is also not, crushing the soul of a people, which can, in some ways can be preventing them from practicing their religion or speaking their language or doing the kind of hard to articulate facets of existence that a group of people do to survive collectively. Like that's the soul of those people. And so with Geist, there's linguistically it kind of puts all of that together, where like we have our individual spirit, we have our collective spirit, and those, if we want to counter ethnocidal practices, are things that we have to cultivate as people at an individual and a collective level. And so like with this newsletter, the idea of bringing Geist out was to get people to think about how you can nurture your collective and individual Geist. And you can see with COVID-19, since we aren't really allowed to socialize as much as we used to, people are really kind of thinking a lot about like their individual spirit or personality, because that's what you have to nurture while you're inside. But when we get outside, which I was trying to do today, but my phone connection was not encouraging me to do that, we have to start thinking about what's the collective iteration of Geist that we want to bring into the space. And so and another thing that's also really interesting about this word is that it's just so common in German. And so to have a word that's really common but also has had philosophers, like big time German philosophers, especially Hegel, has looked into and discussed Geist, and a lot of the concepts of like existentialism and even Marxism talks about not, with Marxism it's more about doing things to stop capitalism from like crushing people's spirits, but like with existentialism there's a focus on nurturing people's spirits. And philosophically that's kind of the role of philosophers, is to encourage this this facet of ourselves that we really can't explain, but try to articulate that's like the most important thing of attributes that you can't explain. and Geist. All right, well, maybe this spot is what works best. I don't know. It's really weird. I'm just sitting in my office. Um, but thanks, Jessica. But the key thing is that with philosophy, it's nice to have these complex words like Geist, have like rigorous analysis and books talking about that, numerous books talking about it, and then have people in their day-to-day practices just use the word and hopefully use the word properly. So it's a subtle example of how philosophy can have a day-to-day impact by shaping the language and the words that people say, where they have a deeper meaning, and then that can manifest into other facets of your day. Oh, great question. So how are you using this word in your personal life? So I use it all the time. One thing that I do find in the U.S., or at least, I don't know, at least for me, is like I grew up in the church, and a lot of the stuff about, if you look at, like, by the church I mean Christianity, where people talk about like the kingdom of heaven is like within you, I think that actually speaks to the notion of Geist, where like within you is like your personality, which is also a spirit, which is also a soul, which is also this collective cultural energy that also connects you to other people. I think there's like a subtle, like, not religious component, but like the message is kind of the same. And so I don't know, I remember when I stopped being super like churchy and saying all the church stuff, I still grew up on it, so the things are in my mind. And so a subtle thing I would do is, if something said like Jesus Christ, I might change it with Geist because it has like the same cadence. And so that's like that was an unanticipated one. The ability to like keep the same like spiritual meaning, but not almost have the baggage that American Christianity has for a lot of people, being able to like do that substitution, which is one. But in general, just the idea to think about that my personality and my soul are like the same, or that my intelligence is my soul, and it's hard, it's not quantifiable, it's quality. So like, if for example I'm good at something, but it's hard to like really show how good that is, in like a test. Having the notion of Geist makes me more confident that like it's still good, even though like it's harder to prove it. And so there's so many different facets of like, the difference between articulating the word and just like saying it like in common speech, but having the word in your head and allowing that to impact how you see yourself and see the values that you provide in society. Because and like another good example is, like, as you, Matt, and I'm sure other people here know, but like I'm a soccer junkie, and I remember when I played soccer, they really wanted to have like quantifiable things to show why somebody was good. Like, how much did they run? How many goals did they score? How did they do this, that, and the other? But then I look at the highest level of soccer, and what makes a lot of players really good is that they just have this inexplicable quality that like the coaches can't explain that why they have it or what it is. It's really hard to show statistically that it, like, what it brings, but at the end, but when you watch it, you experience it, you can see it. You can see that this is a skill that's just this person's innate intelligence, or their mind or their spirit is of such that it has value, even though we struggle to quantify it, but we can see qualify. And so good example. So Matt says that Cassandra says essence, and essence is a similar thing. It's more of like it's like a romance versus so yes, essence does work. Due to me focusing a lot on existentialism, there's like a different meaning of essence compared to Geist, depending on like the philosophical track, but I understand that the spirit, the sense of that word is the same. I think another common way to look at it would be like the French phrase like je ne sais quoi, like someone just has a je ne sais quoi, like they have an I don't know what that I know is valuable, like that I don't know what that is your Geist. It's just who you are. We can't explain it, but we know it has value. And I think in the US we have a hard time viewing things that have value that aren't quantifiable. Geist makes it more qualified. It's qualitative, experiential, and so that's kind of how I use it. So I hope that answered your question, Matt. So here's another question. Let me see. Oh, okay. How and when did I come across this word? That's a great question. A lot of the words that come across are pretty serendipitous. I think there was, let's see. So it's pretty serendipitous. Like a couple years ago, I was hanging out with a professor friend of mine, and they had a book that was about the Frankfurt School, and I said, let me read this book. And then from the Frankfurt School, I just started getting more and more engrossed in German philosophical stuff. And within like the canon of German philosophy, this word Geist is like in it a decent amount. And George Hegel, who is arguably like the father of like modern German philosophy, one of his biggest books was called, in the English it's translated as the Phenomenology of the Mind, and now it's called Phenomenology of Spirit, but originally it was Phenomenology des Geist. And so he wrote a very hard to read, massive book that's all about Geist and being and finding truth, and it's all of like a philosophical exploration about spirit. And it's very hard to understand because it's kind of hard to articulate stuff that you just can't explain. But the key thing is, if you devote that much space to write about this, it shows the significance of Geist and spirit. And so I think I just kind of stumbled across it as I read a whole bunch of various philosophical stuff, and it struck me. And also, like, one of the things I think about a lot is what words we are lacking. What words can we inject into our American dialogue that can benefit people? And so when I stumbled across Geist, and it meant ghost and spirit, I could tell that like they were a bit more interchangeable than how it is in English. Like we might have a spirit, but then we die, we become a ghost. We say that. We don't say like you have a spirit, then you die and your spirit, continues. That seems a bit, that just doesn't seem how we normally say things. And so like at first I thought that was quite profound. And then I found that it also had a collective concept too. And then with the word zeitgeist, it struck me that I had actually heard this word a bunch. I just didn't know it, and I didn't know what it meant. Like I didn't know what zeitgeist, I did know what zeitgeist meant, but I hadn't really thought about what it meant. And so it was one of those words that I just stumbled across amongst reading of various things. And from that, I then realized that there's a deeper meaning to this, and thinking about Geist and articulating it had an impact. And so yeah, so that's kind of how I stumbled across it. I was just kind of the course of reading a bunch of stuff, found it, and I said this has value. And so yeah, but if anybody else has any questions, please let me know. But please subscribe to our newsletter. There's a more in-depth, or just it's just a written out explanation of the word, and a lot of our work focuses on this concept, because and I said this earlier, but if you're focusing on or talking about ethnocide, which is the destruction of culture and keeping the people, we have to incorporate and understand that culture is not just like physical attributes or physical or things that we made, things that we can touch. There is like a spiritual component to culture, and that in the West and the US, that spiritualness, there's a stigma attached to it, but intelligence doesn't have a stigma. Your mind doesn't have a stigma. And so having a word that bridges that divide while also letting people know that intelligence, spirit, soul are a collective thing too, that a people have, and that part of ethnocide is crushing that soul. That's really, really important to realize. And so as we do stuff to counter ethnocide, there has to be like soul affirming, spirit affirming, intelligence affirming practices and concepts that you have to do at an individual and a collective level, because that's just the nature of it. I think now we'll go into like some quick Marxist stuff, but with Marx, there's this concept of alienation, which is how like capitalism, when people were... Oh, I got another question. Oh, cool, there's another question. Okay, let me see. Geist is a pretty dominant word in Germany. Do I know... Geist, what behavior can you tie to? Okay. So, how do I incorporate Geist into our vocabulary? So, there's a lot of ways I guess you could incorporate it into your vocabulary. On a day-to-day, I think you can just say it. You can just articulate it and say Geist. I like American English is one of these weird words, or English itself is just clearly a mixture of Germanic and Romance languages. And so we have just a ton of German words already that we don't really think about. And so the prospect of incorporating more Germanic words in it to fill the gap, I think we should just go ahead and do it. Our language is already just a hodgepodge of stuff. Like we all go to kindergarten. Like that's not an English word. That's a German word. So I think we can incorporate Geist just whenever. So there's no hesitation. I think for secular people that grew up in like Christian churches and don't want to completely like get rid of good facets of it, linguistically, like Geist speaks to the spirit inside you, which has very much like meditative religious components. And so saying like Geist instead of Christ could be like a very simple thing. Someone might view that as sacrilegious, but like if you're already secular, then it doesn't really matter. So I think you just say it, to be honest. Just say my Geist, like it's just what it is. And it'll over time kind of get the proper feel that it should have. Now, what behavior can you tie Geist to? So it's going to be some kind of like, the behavior is going to be kind of subtle, to be honest with you, because I think a lot of the pressure in the U.S. is about conforming or adapting to processes that don't really want to nurture your soul and trying to persevere in these environments. And I think a fascinating thing right now about COVID is, since we're at home, even though there's so many stressors going on, like we have an obligation to like take care of ourselves in our house. And so focusing that energy to make sure that you have the stuff that makes that inexplicable part of yourself feel as comfortable as it can every day is like a big thing to do for regarding Geist. I think that's how it can impact you behaviorally. Um, for example, I water my plants more now. I'm like, I recognize, I need to get some fresh air, or I need to do X, Y, and Z to feel like myself. And having a bit more confidence, self assurance in making those requests or creating that space, I think is really important. And it's easy to do that when you think about your spirit and your intelligence and your mind all being the same thing, and you have to do things to nurture all of that at once because they are the same thing and they're not separate things, where it's not like I'm going to read water my plant because it makes me feel good, and then I'm going to read a book because I need to like feel like I'm getting smarter or something. Like, no, they're all interwoven. So I think behaviorally it can make some subtle adjustments that over time could be quite profound. So next question. Thanks, Jessica. So it's quite a shift to see my personality as my spirit, coming from a Christian background as well. There was a lot of teaching of denying oneself/desires to attain godliness. Exactly. And I think, so in the newsletter, this is a great question. This is a fantastic question. So in the newsletter, I told this story about how a friend of mine asked me if I thought people had souls, which was like, that was a weird question. But the reason for that question is a lot of people think there's like a conscience or a soul inside people that makes people be good or bad. And I just don't think that's the case. You have something inside you, but like you're good or bad based on your actions, not based on whether something's predetermined that you will or won't be good or bad. So to prove to this friend that I thought people had souls, I gave an example of identical twins, where like they're as close to clones as we can create in this world, yet their personalities are different, and we don't know why. We can't say why one likes this and one likes the other. We can't say that they're biologically basically the same, and so there's something about these people that just makes them different, and there's something about all of us that makes all of us different, and that difference is actually the thing that matters arguably the most, even for twins. Like, the fact that they act differently is just as significant, if not more significant, than the fact that they have an identical twin. And so, to me, I viewed that as the existence of a soul, and that is something that you need to nurture, because that's like the most important thing. And so, for some reason, with Christianity and Catholicism, there's this narrative that people are just sinners from birth, and there's something bad about them, and you have to deny your inner sinfulness to become a good person. And that doesn't make any sense to me. And so if you have this teaching that you're naturally bad and you have to do good deeds or something to like stop being a sinner, and you want to counter that belief, you're going to need some sort of language or some sort of research or philosophy that counters that. And I think having this word Geist, where it's not just like you feel it, you make it up. You feel it at an individual level where you feel like you made it up. It's like actually a whole bunch of other people have been thinking about this for a while, and they've written it down, and you can piggyback off of their research. You can use their work to help you try to become as best an iteration of yourself as you can. And that's all about, and so that's why I think Geist is really important. And at the same time, for those people who are scarred by certain aspects of Christianity but like other aspects, the idea of linguistically substituting Geist to, like, instead of Christ, to talk about like the quasi kingdom of heaven that's within you, I think is a really profound linguistic adjustment that someone can make. Jessica, it's a great point. Like, I have heard that once that when you're full of spirit, you're most full of spirit when you're calm, and when you're calm, your intuition is sharpest. And so, prior to COVID, I used to work out of the Eaton Hotel a lot, and this is kind of funny. when I was doing my work about ethnocide, when you think about the destruction of culture all the time, it can be pretty debilitating on your on your personality and just your your disposition on a given day. And so to not be like a morose person all the time, I really thought like I gotta meditate. I gotta take some time to like just focus on myself, just to counter the other not comfortable fun work that I have to do. And I would be in meditation, they'd always say like, clear your brain and don't think. It's like supposed to be full of nothing. But what would always happen is like so many I'd be really relaxed and calm, not tense at all, and just like so many ideas that were good, that were like, affirming ideas would pop into my head, and I was quite sharp, and I would end up meeting like good people and stuff like that at meditation. And so even now I try to take handful of minutes a day just to sit down and be like really calm. And I do notice that when I sit in like a meditative pose, I feel quite relaxed, and it's very helpful. And also like a lot of good ideas just show up in my mind, and like that also kind of connects the spiritual and the intellectual, which Geist I think does quite well, because if I'm meditating, we articulate that very much as like a spiritual thing. But if the things that are popping into my head when I'm doing the spiritual practice are things that somebody would in English ascribe to being intelligent, then there's clearly a connection. And so, but at the same time, we really struggle in this our scientific focused world to quantify the benefit of meditating for X amount of time a day, even though we experience the benefit. It's very experiential. And so yeah, I totally agree. You're definitely very calm when you're taking the time to like nurture your spirit. Okay, so next question. Do I know if Geist is part of everyday language in Germany, and do you know if there is a visible difference as benefit of them nurturing their collective Geist? Yeah, Geist is just a very common word. Like, it's just normal. It's not obscure. I will say, like, if you do start talking about Geist in like the Hegelian sense and all of the philosophical stuff, then they'll be like, oh, you're talking about Hegel, and now you're kind of getting into the layer that's not as common. But like Geist will be referred to someone regarding their intelligence, regarding their, but it means ghost. It also means spirit. So like the regular usages of it that are like the whole slew of words that we included in this week's newsletter, they use Geist for that all the time. And Zeitgeist is also quite, that's a very common German word. And so, it's like if in English we would say that if someone's really popular, that they're trending. It's like a trend. We articulate someone's popularity in a way that's very capitalistic, commodified type of way. In German, they would probably use Zeitgeist. And that definitely shows that there's like an emphasis on this spiritual soul concept that's a bit more prevalent over there linguistically than over here. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of subtle differences and I will also say, like, I'm not a fluent German speaker, and a lot of my this is going to sound really weird, but like a lot of my information about different cultures started from as a kid being fascinated with soccer and like taking deep dives and learning about the different types of soccer that was played in Germany or played in different parts of Germany or France or England, and seeing that like they understood that this was like a cultural expression, that people were getting out to the field to express their spirit, and this spirit would be their Geist. It wouldn't just be to have fun, even though it is fun. It's to express yourself, but then to express yourself in an individual level as a player, and then as a collective level as a team. And so yeah. So, oh man, Matt's got a bunch of stuff for the high quality of their engineering, technology. I think it shows in their education system as well. There isn't the hierarchy of jobs, positions in their society as much as we do here. Their car mechanic holds a similar value as an engineer. And so this is a really good point. And a big, so like, so this is a weird thing, but like, Hegel was this big philosopher, and Karl Marx first studied Hegelian stuff, and he was called a new Hegelian, and then his work went in his own direction. But Hegel has influenced a lot of Germanic stuff, and Geist is like a key component of his work. And one thing that the Germans and a lot of Europe did to criticize capitalism was this talk of alienation, and how when you work, like, you should be able to inject your soul and your culture into your work to give that work purpose. And industrialization and the excessive like machinery that was created remove people from their labor. Like, they would do work all day, and that work, they wouldn't see the end result of it, or the work that they were doing wasn't an expression of their personality, of their Geist. And so, like, you were alienated from your labor. From the end result of your labor. You were alienated from the labor yourself because it wasn't labor that you cared about. And then, due to spending your whole day doing work you didn't care about for products you didn't care about, you then were alienated from yourself. Like, you didn't even know what your spirit or Geist was anymore because you just hadn't done it in so long. And at the same time, with these like assembly line type things, people would get alienated they would alienate themselves from their coworker, because you're just sitting on an assembly line, not talking to each other, doing work that you don't care about for a product that you don't care about, with the goal of getting money that maybe will be just enough to survive. And so this concept of alienation is an articulation of how, like, industrialization and capitalism, if not regulated and done properly, can crush people's souls. And we need to make sure that we have rules so that people feel that their soul is sustained, that their intelligence is used and nurtured as they work. And I think that concept really impacts a lot of Germanic and just European culture, where they've had a linguistic, philosophical rebuttal to industrialization. And the US, like, we don't have that language for that, because our culture in many ways has been based around extracting or crushing people's souls in order to make money, whether that was ethnocide with ethnocide starting with the transatlantic slave trade, but then there's various manifestations of it, because whether you are the person who is getting your soul crushed by an oppressor, that person who wakes up every day in their life is to extract someone's soul for a living, like, that's also alienating too. And like having this dynamic at just a sustained level throughout all of American society without like the language to counter it is just very, very problematic. And so I think in that regard, it definitely shows up differently and impacts how other cultures decide to structure themselves, or how people decide to view themselves. So it's a very individual and collective thing. And so yeah, no, very, very good points. And actually, so I'll follow up with this last thing for Matt. In Germany, for the longest time, before like industrialization happened and their whole society got quite different, there's this word called Feierabend, which just means like afternoon party. And people would spend their end of their day in their town. They would have like an afternoon party, which could be like, they sit around a fire, or they go to a bar or something like that. But then as people were working longer and longer hours, it became harder for people to still do their Feierabends at the end of the day that kept their community structure intact. And so like one of the big voices for like the German labor movement was like, we need our fire opens, which I will say is like a manifestation of like the collective spirit of a people, and understanding the importance of having this fire open, which you can't quantify. It's hard to say how much money that brings in, but it keeps people's spirits alive. That shaped German culture and their labor laws, and that's very like a Geist oriented kind of concept. And so great question, Matt. And let's see. So yeah, if that I think that's all the questions. If there's any other questions, please let me know. Thanks for all the hearts, and yeah, and if you guys like our newsletter and like these chats, please share it with your friends. Share all the information, because we think that one word a week, allowing people to think about it and talk about it and get their questions answered, can over time make a big difference. It's imagine, if we do this for, our plans to do this for quite a while, but just in 3 months, everyone would get an extra 12 words to think about that they could use every day. That's pretty significant. If the words are as profound as ethnocide or Geist or convivir or pre-racial, it's a big deal. And so please share it with your friends. Tell more people about these IG lives and Q&As, and we'll be great. So thanks for coming. I really appreciated it, and everyone have a great rest of your weekend.